Chapter 12 of the Riddle of the Sands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gesine. The Riddle of the Sands by Erskine Childers. Chapter 12. My Initiation. The yacht lay with a very slight heel, thanks to a pair of small bilge keels on her bottom, in a sort of trough she had dug for herself, so that she was still ringed with a few inches of water, as it were with a moat. For miles in every direction lay a desert of sand. To the north it touched the horizon, and was only broken by the blue dot of Neuerk Island and its lighthouse. To the east it seemed also to stretch to infinity, but the smoke of a steamer showed where it was pierced by the stream of the Elbe. To the south it ran up to the pencil line of the Hanover shore. Only to the west was its outline broken by any vestiges of the sea it had risen from. There it was astir with crawling white filaments, knotted confusedly at one spot in the northwest, whence came a sibilant murmur like the hissing of many snakes. Desert as I call it, it was not entirely featureless. Its colour varied from light fawn, where the highest levels had dried in the wind, to brown or deep violet where it was still wet, and slate grey where patches of mud soiled its clean bosom. Here and there were pools of water, smitten into ripples by the impotent wind; here and there it was speckled by shells and seaweed. And close to us, beginning to bend away towards that hissing knot in the northwest, wound our poor little channel, mercilessly exposed as a stagnant, muddy ditch with scarcely a foot of water, not deep enough to hide our small kedge anchor, which perked up one fluke in impudent mockery. The dull, hard sky, the wind moaning in the rigging as though crying in despair for a prey that had escaped it, made the scene inexpressibly forlorn. Davies scanned with gusto for a moment, climbed to a point of vantage on the boom, and swept his glasses to and fro along the course of the channel. "Fairly well boomed," he said, meditatively, "but one or two are very much out. By Jove, that's a tricky bend there." He took a bearing with the compass, made a note or two, and sprang with a vigorous leap down on to the sand. This, I may say, was the only way of "going ashore" that he really liked. We raced off as far as our clumsy sea would let us, and followed up the course of our channel to the west, reconnoitring the road we should have followed when the tide rose. "The only way to learn a place like this," he shouted, "is to see it at low water. The banks are dry then, and the channels are plain. Look at that boom." He stopped and pointed contemptuously. "It's all out of place. I suppose the channel's shifted there. It's just at an important bend, too. If you took it as a guide when the water was up, you'd run aground." "Which would be very useful," I observed. "Oh, hang it!" he laughed. "We're exploring. I want to be able to run through this channel without a mistake. We will next time." He stopped and plied compass and notebook. Then we raced on till the next halt was called. "Look," he said, "the channel's getting deeper. It was nearly dry a moment ago. See the current in it now? That's the flood tide coming up, from the west, mind you, that is, from the Weser side. That shows we're past the watershed." "Watershed?" I repeated blankly. "Yes, that's what I call it. You see, a big sand such as this is like a range of hills dividing two plains. It's never dead flat, though it looks it. There's always one point, one ridge, rather, where it's highest. Now a channel cutting right through the sand is, of course, always at its shallowest when it's crossing this ridge. At low water it's generally dry there, and it gradually deepens as it gets nearer to the sea on either side. Now at high tide, when the whole sand is covered, the water can travel where it likes, but directly the ebb sets in, the water falls away on either side of the ridge, and the channel becomes two rivers flowing in opposite directions from the centre, or watershed, as I call it. So also when the ebb has run out, and the flood begins, the channel is fed by two currents flowing to the centre and meeting in the middle. Here the Elbe and the Weser are our two feeders. Now this current here is going eastwards; we know by the time of day that the tide is rising, therefore the watershed is between us and the yacht." "Why is it so important to know that?" "Because these currents are strong, and you want to know when you'll lose a fair one and strike a foul one. Besides, the ridge is the critical point when you're crossing on a falling tide, and you want to know when you're past it." We pushed on till our path was barred by a big lagoon. It looked far more imposing than the channel, but Davies, after a rapid scrutiny, treated it to a grunt of contempt. "It's a cul-de-sac," he said. "See that hump of sand it's making for, beyond?" "It's boomed," I remonstrated, pointing to a decrepit stem drooping over the bank, and shaking a palsied finger at the imposture. "Yes, that's just where one goes wrong; it's an old cut that's silted up. That boom's a fraud; there's no time to go farther, the flood's making fast. I'll just take bearings of what we can see." The false lagoon was the first of several that began to be visible in the west, swelling and joining hands over the ribs of sand that divided them. All the time the distant hissing grew nearer and louder, and a deep, thunderous note began to sound beneath it. We turned our backs to the wind and hastened back towards the Dulcibella, the stream in our channel hurrying and rising alongside of us. "There's just time to do the other side," said Davies when we reached her, and I was congratulating myself on having regained our base without finding our communications cut. And away we scurried in the direction we had come that morning, splashing through pools and jumping the infant runnels that were stealing out through rifts from the mother channel as the tide rose. Our observations completed, back we travelled, making a wide circuit over higher ground to avoid the encroaching flood, and wading shin-deep in the final approach to the yacht. As I scrambled thankfully aboard, I seemed to hear a far-off voice saying, in languid depreciation of yachting, that it did not give one enough exercise. It was mine, centuries ago, in another life. From east and west two sheets of water had overspread the desert, each pushing out tongues of surf that met and fused. I waited on deck and watched the death throes of the suffocating sands under the relentless onset of the sea. The last strongholds were battered, stormed, and overwhelmed, the tumult of sounds sank and steadied, and the sea swept victoriously over the whole expanse. The Dulcibella, hitherto contemptuously inert, began to wake and tremble under the buffetings she received. Then, with an effort, she jerked herself on to an even keel, and bumped and strained fretfully, impatient to vanquish this insolent invader and make him a slave for her own ends. Soon the warp tightened, and her nose swung slowly round; only her stern bumped now, and that with decreasing force. Suddenly she was free and drifting broadside to the wind till the anchor checked her, and she brought up to leeward of it, rocking easily and triumphantly. Good-humoured little person! At heart she was friends alike with sand and sea. It was only when the old love and the new love were in mortal combat for her favours, and she was mauled in the fracas, that her temper rose in revolt. We swallowed a hasty cup of tea, ran up the sails, and started off west again. Once across the watershed we met a strong current, but the trend of the passage was now more to the northwest, so that we could hold our course without tacking, and consequently could stem the tide. "Give her just a foot of the centre plate," said Davies. "We know the way here, and she'll make less leeway, but we shall generally have to do without it on a falling tide. If you run aground with a plate down you deserve to be drowned." I now saw how valuable our walk had been. The booms were on our right, but they were broken reeds, giving no hint as to the breadth of the channel. A few had lost their tops, and were being engulfed altogether by the rising water. When we came to the point where they ceased, and the false lagoon had lain, I should have felt utterly lost.